Have you ever stopped and asked yourself one of the most fundamental questions about the country you live in? How does the United States government actually make its money? Where does the trillion-dollar federal budget actually come from? Who pays for the military, the roads, the schools, the hospitals, Social Security, Medicare, and every other government program and service that touches the daily lives of every single American? Today we are going to pull back the curtain completely and show you exactly how the United States government generates its enormous revenue and what that means for your wallet every single day of your life. Before we break down each individual revenue source, you need to understand the sheer scale of what we are talking about. The United States federal government collects approximately $4 to $5 trillion in revenue every single year, making it the single largest financial operation on the face of the entire planet. To put that number in perspective, $4 trillion is more money than the entire gross domestic product of every country in the world except for the United States itself and China. It is a number so large that it is almost impossible for the human brain to truly comprehend. But here is the part that most Americans never fully appreciate. Even with $4 to $5 trillion coming in every year, the United States government still spends significantly more than it collects. The federal government consistently spends $6 to $7 trillion per year, meaning it runs an annual deficit of approximately $1 to $2 trillion every single year. That gap between what the government collects and what it spends has created a national debt that has now surpassed $33 trillion and continues to grow larger every single day. But we will talk more about that later. First, let us understand exactly where all that revenue actually comes from. The single largest source of revenue for the United States federal government is the individual income tax. Every year, individual Americans pay approximately $2 trillion in federal income taxes, making this one source alone responsible for roughly 50% of all federal government revenue. That means every single time you look at your paycheck and see that chunk of money missing labeled federal income tax, you are looking at the engine that powers the largest government operation in the history of human civilization. The federal income tax works on what is called a progressive tax system. This means that Americans who earn more money pay a higher percentage of their income in taxes, while Americans who earn less money pay a lower percentage. The tax rates in America currently range from 10% at the lowest level all the way up to 37% at the highest level for the wealthiest Americans. However, and this is a critically important point that most Americans never fully understand, almost nobody actually pays the top rate on all of their income. Because of how the bracket system works, you only pay the higher rate on the portion of your income that falls within that specific bracket, not on your total income. What makes the individual income tax so powerful as a government revenue tool is its reach. There are approximately 150 million individual tax returns filed in America every single year. That is 150 million Americans all contributing to the same giant revenue pool that funds the entire operation of the federal government. When you pay your taxes, you are not just fulfilling a legal obligation. You are literally paying for the roads you drive on, the military that protects you, the courts that uphold your rights, and hundreds of other services that make American daily life possible. The second largest source of federal government revenue is something that most Americans are paying every single paycheck, but very few truly understand. Payroll taxes, also known as FICA taxes, which stands for the Federal Insurance Contributions Act. Payroll taxes fund two of the largest and most important Programs in all of American government. Social Security and Medicare. Every time you receive a paycheck in America, 6.2% of your earnings are automatically taken out for Social Security, and an additional 1.45% is taken out for Medicare. That is a combined 7.65% of every dollar you earn going directly to fund these programs. And here is the part that many Americans do not realize. Your employer is also required to match that exact same amount on your behalf. So the total payroll tax contribution for every employed American is actually 15.3% of their wages, split equally between the employee and the employer. If you are self-employed as a freelancer, business owner, or contractor, you pay the entire 15.3% yourself, which is one of the most significant financial challenges facing the growing gig economy workforce in America today. Payroll taxes collectively generate approximately $1.2 trillion in revenue for the federal government every single year, making them the second most important revenue source after individual income taxes. The third major source of federal government revenue is the corporate income tax. American corporations are required to pay federal taxes on their profits, and the current corporate tax rate in the United States is 21% of taxable income. Corporate taxes generate approximately $400 to $500 billion in federal revenue every single year, representing roughly 10% of total federal collections. However, corporate taxation in America is one of the most complex, controversial, and frequently debated aspects of the entire federal revenue system. While the official corporate tax rate is 21%, the effective tax rate that large American corporations actually pay after all deductions, credits, loopholes, and accounting strategies are applied is often significantly lower. In fact, some of the largest and most profitable corporations in American history have managed to reduce their effective federal tax rate to single digits, or in some notable cases to virtually zero, through completely legal tax planning strategies. This gap between the official corporate tax rate and what companies actually pay is one of the most politically charged debates in all of American economic policy, and it directly affects how much of the overall tax burden falls on individual American workers versus the corporations they work for and purchase products from every day. Here is the part of this story that most Americans find genuinely shocking and deeply concerning when they hear it explained clearly for the first time. Despite collecting $4 to $5 trillion in revenue every single year, the United States government still borrows an additional $1 to $2 trillion on top of that every year to cover the gap between what it collects and what it spends. The government borrows this money by issuing financial instruments called Treasury bonds, Treasury notes, and Treasury bills. These are essentially official government loans where investors, both domestic and foreign, lend money to the United States government in exchange for regular interest payments and the promise of getting their principal back at a specific future date. The United States government has historically been considered the safest borrower in the entire world because it has never defaulted on its debt obligations in its entire history. The largest holders of American government debt include American citizens through their retirement accounts and investment portfolios, American financial institutions like banks and insurance companies, the Federal Reserve itself, and foreign governments, with Japan and China historically being the two largest foreign holders of American debt. The total accumulated national debt has now surpassed $33 trillion, and the interest payments alone on that debt now cost the federal government over $1 trillion per year, making interest on the national debt one of the single largest items in the entire federal budget. This means that a significant portion of the taxes you pay every year goes not toward any government service or program, but simply toward paying the interest on money the government borrowed in the past. Beyond the big three revenue sources of individual income taxes, payroll taxes, and corporate taxes, the federal government also generates revenue from several other important sources that most Americans rarely think about. Excise taxes are taxes placed on specific goods and activities. The federal government collects excise taxes on gasoline, alcohol, tobacco, airline tickets, firearms, and several other specific products and services. Every time you fill up your gas tank, a portion of what you pay goes directly to the federal government as an excise tax. Every time you buy a plane ticket, a federal excise tax is included in the price. These taxes collectively generate approximately $100 billion per year. Estate taxes, also known as inheritance taxes, are charged on the transfer of wealth from deceased Americans to their heirs. Currently, only estates valued above approximately $12 million are subject to federal estate tax making. This is a relatively small revenue source that affects only the wealthiest American families. Estate taxes generate approximately $25 to $30 billion per year. Federal Reserve earnings represent another significant but little known revenue source. The Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States, generates profits through its various operations, including interest earned on government securities it holds, and it transfers the vast majority of those profits directly to the United States Treasury every year. This transfer has ranged from approximately $50 to $100 billion in recent years, depending on economic conditions and Federal Reserve activities. Fees and other miscellaneous revenues round out the government's income picture. The federal government charges fees for a vast array of services, including passport applications, national park entry, federal court filing fees, broadcast spectrum licenses, and hundreds of other government services that generate billions in additional revenue each year. Now that we understand how the government makes its money, the equally important question is, where does all of it actually go? Social Security is consistently the single largest expenditure in the entire federal budget, consuming approximately $1 trillion per year. This program provides retirement income to approximately 60 million Americans and represents the most fundamental financial safety net in all of American society. Medicare and Medicaid together represent the second largest category of federal spending at approximately $800 billion to $1 trillion per year. These programs provide healthcare coverage to elderly Americans, disabled Americans, and low-income Americans who would otherwise have no access to medical care. National defense and military spending consumes approximately $800 billion to $1 trillion per year, making the United States military by far the most expensively funded military force in the entire history of human civilization. Interest on the national debt, as we mentioned earlier, now costs over $1 trillion per year, and this number grows larger every single year as the total debt continues to accumulate. Everything else, including education, transportation, veterans benefits, foreign aid, scientific research, law enforcement, and hundreds of other government programs and services, is funded from whatever remains after. The big four categories are covered. So, what does all of this mean for you personally as an everyday American trying to build financial security for yourself and your family? It means that understanding how the government generates and spends its revenue is not just an academic exercise. It is essential financial literacy, because every single one of these revenue mechanisms directly affects your paycheck, your retirement savings, your healthcare costs, your home value, the prices you pay for goods and services, and your overall financial well-being, in ways that are profound and constant. Understanding the tax system means you can legally minimize what you owe. Understanding how Social Security is funded means you can make smarter decisions about when and how to claim your benefits. Understanding the national debt means you can make more informed decisions about your investments and how to protect your wealth from inflation. And understanding corporate taxes means you can see more clearly why wealthy Americans and large corporations often pay lower effective tax rates than middle-class working Americans, and what legal strategies are available to reduce your own tax burden. Knowledge of how your government finances itself is one of the most powerful and practical financial education tools any American can possess, and now you have it. The United States government is the largest and most complex financial operation in the history of human civilization. It collects trillions from the hard work of ordinary Americans, borrows trillions more from investors around the world, and spends it all on programs and services that touch every single aspect of American daily life. Understanding this system is not just interesting, it is empowering. Because the more clearly you understand how your government makes and spends money, the more clearly you can see the opportunities within that system to legally keep more of your own money, make smarter investment decisions, and build the kind of financial security that protects you and your family no matter what happens in Washington. If this video gave you a clearer picture of how America's financial engine actually works, please hit the like button and share this video with every American you know who deserves to understand the system they are living and working inside every single day. Subscribe for more financial education videos every week.